We'll go. We'll go ahead and get started. I appreciate everyone participating today. As we get into this, I guess I'll let everyone else kind of introduce themselves as they start reading through their slides. My name is Nathan Ewert. I'm a civil engineer with the Public Works Department at the Town of Wellington. The presentation that we're going to be going through today is going to provide a general discussion on the floodplain project background. It will also provide some online resources for viewing the floodplain in relation to affected properties. It'll provide a brief summary of the study process and timeline. And then finally, we'll go over some of the general insurance information and some of the development implications. I guess during the meeting, if you do have questions, we ask that you use the chat box. We'll be monitoring that. If you don't feel comfortable using the chat box or you have questions come up following the meeting, feel free to reach out to me at the Town of Wellington. Personally, my phone number and my email have been on several of the social media postings, as well as the mailer that was sent out to the affected properties. And then it's also going to be available on the last slide of the presentation. I guess at this time, I'll let any other town staff introduce themselves. It looks like Bob is on. I don't know if Bob wants to introduce himself.
I'll do that real quick since you kind of set me up. I'm Bob Gowing. I'm the Public Works Director, and the engineering division is in Public Works. So I've been working with Nathan on this project and several other stormwater management projects.
Okay. So with that, I think that's the only other staff on the phone. So I'll turn it over to CWCB and AECOM and FEMA and let them run through the rest of these slides.
I'm Terry Fade. I'm the Floodplain Mapping Program Manager for the Colorado Water Conservation Board.
Hello, I'm Marta Blanco Castano. I work with Terry Fade in the Flood Mapping Program at the Colorado Water Conservation. Nice to meet you all virtually.
I'm Erin May. I'm the NFIP Bureau and Statistical Agent for FEMA's Region 8. I'll be talking about the flood insurance implications tonight and answering your flood insurance questions.
I'm Isaac Allen, Water Resources Engineer with AECOM. I'll be kind of overviewing some of what went into the flood insurance study and talking through some of the more technical information during the presentation tonight.
My name is Rigel Rucker. I was the project manager on the AECOM side. We produced the technical analysis that went into the maps that are being presented now.
All right, I think, does that cover everybody? I will go ahead and share my screen. We can jump into the presentation. Can I just get confirmation from somebody that that's the presentation showing up?
I'm not seeing it so far.
It's not showing yet.
Okay.
Oh,
Let me try and reshare maybe. How about now?
yep.
There
it's
we
showing
go.
now. Yep,
Yes.
perfect.
All right. All right, so like I mentioned, my name's Isaac Allen. I'm a water resources engineer with AECOM, and I'm going to be overviewing a lot of the technical information that went into this flood risk study. And then we'll also hand it off to Aaron a little bit later in the presentation to talk through some of the more specific flood insurance implications for this work. So most of the beginning of this, Nathan just went through But just to reiterate one more time about the purpose of this meeting, the main objective of this meeting is to provide background on why this study is going on and who is involved, and also really to answer a lot of general questions, hopefully all at once, that come up surrounding, what went into this study, what's the outcome of this study, et cetera. We'll go over the process that went into developing this information, along with the timeline for future aspects of this project. We'll go into detail about the mapping results that were generated, what the different zones mean, and then, like I said, what the insurance implications are associated with each of those different areas. We'll overview some resources and next steps associated with the project, and give you the appropriate outreach tools for any questions you have on this updated information and who to direct that to, and then give you some additional information about, open up some time for questions at the end if there's specific things that we can address on this call. If not, there will be opportunities I think Nathan will go over to set up meetings to discuss specific situations. So first off, why is it important to study flood risks? Obviously, if you watch the news, if you've experienced flooding at your current location, you know that floods are devastating. They can result in a lot of loss in both property and life. And flood risk, as communities develop and as conditions on the ground change, as climate changes, flood risk changes. It's not static, it's always evolving. And so it's important to stay up to date with how that risk is changing, so that we have an idea of who's at risk and can offer them the appropriate protections. Updated flood risk information is also very important for future community planning. For communities, having updated data gives them the tools and resources to make good decisions about where to develop, and make decisions about how to best plan for the future around areas of high risk. The other component is that flood risk goes into the National Flood Insurance Program. And the National Flood Insurance Program is what allows homeowners to get flood insurance, and in the event of a flood, federal disaster relief money to help with the post-flood period and rebuilding. In addition to that, just from a community standpoint, when participating in the National Flood Insurance Program, there's a number of building requirements, insurance requirements, and land use requirements that rely on updated flood information, and that information needs to be current so that it matches to whatever it's needed for. The National Flood Insurance Program has a number of different aspects to it. It's a voluntary program that Wellington is a participant in. As I mentioned on the last slide, it allows homeowners in an area to buy insurance based on what their risk is, and also makes them eligible for federal assistance. The program is kind of operated by a number of different entities. It's overseen by FEMA and their partners, but managed at the community level from a development standpoint, and enforced by lenders. And then engineers such as myself also play a key role in terms of developing the data that is used to determine risk, and continuously updating that information as things change and as conditions in a stream, in and around a stream update. When developing this flood risk information, there's a number of different parties that are involved in the development and outreach, and communication of this information. Obviously, community officials for different areas are there to administer the National Flood Insurance Program, to manage construction, facilitate the adoption of new flood information, enforce regulation, identify changes that happen and what their impacts to flood risk might be, and obviously are responsible for public communication. The state, so the CWCB is there to respond to community requests to update the flood risk information to keep it up to date. They serve as a partner for community assistance and also partner with FEMA. FEMA is there to help with providing money for new studies. They include new studies on the National Flood Insurance Rate Maps, and then also are part of the administration of National Flood Insurance Program. And then obviously there's a number of private stakeholders that are involved that work with community officials to update the information and get the appropriate information included in the flood risk studies. Switching over to go through some of this flood insurance studies timeline and what went into it. So the main area we're focusing on for this presentation tonight is obviously the town of Wellington, and within and around the town of Wellington, the predominant flooding sources that were studied are Box Elder Creek, and then also a portion of Indian Creek on the southeastern side of the town. So that's the information that's referred to here. In order to develop the updated flood risk information, there's a whole data development process that occurs prior to seeing any updated flood maps. So want to spend just a few minutes here tonight to kind of overview that process and hopefully give good background information in case there's any general questions about, you know, what went into this, what information is used to develop this new flood risk, to give some more background. So when flood risk data is developed, the first thing that's done is terrain data is collected, and what that means is that basically a model of the Earth's surface is determined using what's called LiDAR, which is flown by a plane and captures the ground conditions as they are. That terrain data is then processed so that it's in a usable format to be used for the flood risk study, and developed into a product that's accessible for different people. The LiDAR data, the terrain data that's captured via the plane flights captures, you know, 98% of what's on the ground, but isn't able to capture all of the information that's ultimately needed to develop the flood information, the flood risk information that goes on to the regulatory maps. So in addition to that terrain data, there's also survey crews that go out and collect additional data to use for the flood risk study. That survey information is typically collected at stream crossings such as bridges and culverts and things like that. And then also we have data collected within the stream channel so that we can understand what the bottom of the channel looks like, basically underneath the water. In addition to yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Okay. In addition to the survey crew that goes out, we also have engineers that are involved in that process, and they essentially are walking the streams that we're studying in order to collect information about some of the hydraulic conditions that we're evaluating, take pictures and better understand the reaches we're working on. So kind of getting boots on the ground to better understand the area that we're studying. Once that information is collected, we go through the process of updating the hydrology information. That hydrology study determines how much water is going to flow during a flood. We develop information for a number of different magnitude flood events so that that's available. And then all of that information is combined into a hydraulic model. A hydraulic model basically is used to represent the ground conditions, and then we apply the hydrology that we calculated, so the flow rates that we calculated, and like I said, that all gets combined together and is used to ultimately model what a flood event would look like and determine the water surface elevations that would occur because of a flood event. And then once we have those water surface elevations, we then combine that information back with the original terrain data that was collected in order to determine the flooding extents that we would see again during a flood event that we have determined. And then once the floodplains are generated, all of that information then gets collected and ultimately gets put onto flood maps, which is the main back-end product that's used for things like insurance determinations, etc. So at this point, we've gone through all of this data development, and we've developed these flood rate maps, preliminary flood rate maps, and are now at a point that that information is being shared with the communities and is going through the FEMA regulatory process to become the new information. So switching over now that, like I mentioned, that flood insurance or that flood risk data has been developed, we're moving into now the kind of the regulatory side of the update process to get the new flood insurance information to the point where it's used for insurance determinations, etc. As with any regulatory process, there's a number of different steps that have to happen in order for that information to go from where it is right now to the point where it's effective information, which means that that's the information, again, used to determine insurance rates. So the first step in that process is to issue preliminary information, preliminary flood insurance rate maps. That for the town of Wellington occurred at the beginning of 2021. After those preliminary rate maps were issued, there was a CCO meeting that occurred also earlier in the year. And then, now we're holding this public review period. And in the next couple months here is going to kick off what is a really important milestone for this flood insurance rate map update, which is the appeal and comment period, the 90-day appeal and comment period. And essentially what that is an official opportunity for communities to provide specific feedback on the map via an appeal or a comment. And I'll go into some additional detail in a few slides here on exactly what constitutes an appeal and a comment, because it's not just any information. It has to be very specific information received if it's going to be considered for inclusion in these updated maps or revising the updated maps that have been provided. So like I mentioned, I'll discuss those in a little bit more detail. The appeal period, the appeal and comment period, is a 90-day window, and that will begin this summer into the fall. and that gets triggered after a publication in the Federal Register and two notices go out in the local newspaper. So that 90-day appeal period will be happening in the near future and will be initiated via those two things. That 90-day period is a very fixed amount of time. So anything that is going to go in as an appeal or comment has to be received in that window. I'll also talk some more about that in a couple slides here. After the appeal period happens, there's some time after that for FEMA to go through and actually incorporate any information, if there was some received during the appeal, into the maps and make sure they get updated. And then it goes to a letter of final determination, which is kind of signing off that this study is done. And then the revised maps are delivered to the community, and they're given a window through which they can basically adopt that information, roll that new information into their community ordinances and such. And then finally, that information goes effective. So it's an effective flood insurance rate map. That means it's the information used to make these development decisions, et cetera. And it's kind of the end of that life cycle for updating the maps. Based on where we're at right now, the anticipation is that the effective flood insurance rate maps and flood insurance study developed from this information will be effective in early 2022. Switching now to what's actually going to be included on those maps, the actual flooding that's depicted on those. First off, I want to start with this slide. We like to include this slide because it answers a lot of the common questions that we see about what's actually depicted as the flood on the flood insurance rate map. Because from the modeling standpoint, the flood risk information that's shown is just one unique set of conditions, and it's based off of the information that's available at the time that the modeling and mapping is being done. But actual floods are going to be different every single time that they happen for a number of different reasons. For example, if a dam breaks during a flood, that changes the conditions in the stream and changes how flooding is going to occur. If a bridge or a culvert gets clogged, that can change the conditions on the ground and change where water gets during a flood. If there's debris buildup, that can change things. All of these things factor into any flood being a unique set of conditions and therefore having a unique inundation extent. So, keep that in mind when you're looking at the maps. A common question that we will receive is that, someone may have been living in an area for a long time and have seen maybe a flood event, and they note to us, I experienced this event, but we didn't see flooding over to this area. There's a number of different things that could be causing that difference from what you're seeing on the map. I went through a number of them. The event you saw may not exactly match to the amount of water that we are modeling in the event that's mapped. So there's a number of different things that may cause a difference from something you may have seen in the past. As I mentioned, also good to keep in mind that the models that we're creating are based on topographic data, so ground data and survey that are taken at a fixed point in time. So obviously over time, things in a stream, watershed can change. There can be development, et cetera, that changes what's going on and how a flood's going to happen. And then the information that we're using to develop the models is the best information that's available at the time that the study's going on. So again, good things to keep in mind as you're looking through the flood insurance maps. This slide here depicts an example of what you might see on a flood insurance rate map, and we have it included here just to kind of give you some familiarity about what sort of information is presented there. So on your flood insurance rate map, you'll see a number of different flood risk zones depicted. There will be a 0.2 annual chance flood risk zone, which is in orange here, and that represents essentially an event that is often referred to as a 500-year event, but more accurately is an event that has a 0.2% chance of happening in any given year. You'll see zone A's. They can have different lettering, zone AE, zone AO, but anything with an A represents the 1% annual chance flood event. In this image on the screen, those areas are shown in blue. That you may have heard referred to as a 100-year flood event. Again, more accurately, that's an event that has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. So you can have 100 back-to-back 100-year flood events happen in 2 consecutive years. It's not restricted to once every 100 years. It's a 1% chance of happening in any given year. And then on most maps, you'll also see a floodway zone determined, which in this case is the kind of hashed red and blue area. I'm going to go into some additional detail on the floodway in the next slide here. The example you're seeing here and all of the flood insurance rate maps are available online via FEMA's Map Service Center and the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer to look at the information for your area. So I mentioned on the previous slide that one of the zones that's commonly depicted on the flood insurance rate maps is the floodway zone. The floodway zone, we often get a lot of questions on because it's a regulatory concept. It's not, physically based in like a 1% annual chance flood. It's a determination that's made for regulation purposes. The floodway has a couple of different components. Basically, the floodway itself is intended to identify the highest hazard areas of the 1% annual chance floodplain. And then anything that's outside of that floodway that's in the 100-year 1% annual chance floodplain is called the flood fringe. Commonly, we like to refer to the floodway as the don't impact your neighbor zone designation on a map. And essentially what it's intended to do is show areas where if you develop inside of that floodway zone, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to cause an increase in the water surface elevations to someone else within the floodplain if development occurs there. It's best used as a regulatory tool to kind of identify where and where not to develop to make sure that you're not causing a burden on someone else in the floodplain, and also can be a good tool for managing future development from the community standpoint. If you are located within a floodway zone, there's additional restrictions in terms of development, et cetera, that apply to your property. So if you have any questions about if you are in a floodway and you have questions about what the implications are, I would highly recommend communicating with your community resources to understand what what goes along with that. If you're close to the floodway in one of the fringe areas, it's also a good idea to know what the building requirements are for those areas. So again, any questions I would direct to your community representatives. For this area, so we, developed this updated flood information, and then take a national data set that's available showing building footprints, to get a sense of how many new structures are in or out of the revised floodplain information that was determined. And for the town of Wellington and surrounding areas, it looks like the total number of structures that are in the current effective information, so the stuff that's available right now, there were 95 structures. In the preliminary special flood hazard layer, so the preliminary maps, there's 175 structures. And of those, there was a total of 3 that were removed and 83 that were added. So there can be situations where, one was taken out, but another was put in. There can be situations where you're in and remained in, out or remained out. So there's a number of different situations that can happen. I would just reiterate again, this is based on a national data set. So these may not be the exact numbers of structures that went in and out, but is an approximation based on the information that we have to work with. So what does that all mean? What does all this flood risk information mean for you? And are you at risk of flooding? So again, there's a number of things I'd like to touch on here because it's not necessarily as cut and dry as you're in the designated flood areas based on the studies. So you're at risk or you're out, so you're not. The information that's determined from this flood study is a line on the map, which means that it is, just a hard boundary. But like I mentioned previously, that information can change based on unique conditions that happen during a flood, if there's dam breaks, et cetera, if there's buildup at culverts. So, a natural flood isn't necessarily going to follow a line on the map. That line is just generated based off of the best engineering data and judgment that we have available at the time, and is a determination that we've made. But there may be additional risk that's not exactly captured on those maps. So keep that in mind when you see that you're in or out of a flood zone. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is a data-based scientific process, but it allows for change and recognizes that if there's new information that's available, that can improve the study and can be incorporated. And if there's revised information or scientifically determined information to include with it in this updated flood insurance study, that can be incorporated if it's done in the appropriate way. So there's avenues to change. They just have to be done under the appropriate kind of structure that's set up for this. Again, can't emphasize it enough. Even though you're outside of a designated flood zone, that does not mean that you don't have any risk. Risk is always changing, and the information that's shown on these maps is a snapshot in time. So, don't get into a false sense of security just because you're outside of one of the designated zones in this study. So switching over now, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to talk about some of the specific insurance implications that go with these studies.
Hi, everybody. So we've got some pretty big changes coming within the NFIP, and I'm going to go over some of those tonight. I've got my cheat sheet here, so I make sure I don't miss some of the talking points. But I think the most important thing to make note of is that while our rating methodology is changing and it's not necessarily related to the flood zones that are on the flood maps we're talking about tonight, the mandatory purchase is still tied to the flood zones. So if you move into that high-risk flood zone for the first time and you have a federally backed mortgage, you're going to have a requirement for flood insurance. So that's the key thing to keep in mind that is not changing in this whole process. So let's talk a little bit about what's coming. Well, we've got a whole new rating methodology that is changing pretty dramatically the way we rate flood policies. It is no longer just based on the flood zone. That rating methodology uses newer, less static rating tools. In a lot of ways, our program had been using the same tools that we've been using since the early 1960s to rate homes. And there's just a lot of new information out there that we've now incorporated into our rating methodology. And it's based on a number of variables. And if you guys want to read more on what's going on, both at, what this whole program looks like and the information that FEMA's made available on the website, that's on that first link down below. And then the second link talks about the specifics of our state profiles. And what that means is, how are these rating changes going to affect our current policyholders? So that's kind of got some interesting data in it. So feel free to browse that. It even drills down to the county level, although I think the county information is a little bit difficult to read. But let's go to the next slide. And on this new slide here, you're going to see what we're calling our legacy pricing methodology. That's the methodology that's being currently used. And right now, we have a lot fewer rating variables in that scenario. And one of the biggest changes that's coming is the fact that we're incorporating a lot more flooding source information. So for example, right now, our two flood sources are riverine and coastal. Well, we're now going to be incorporating up to 6 different types of flood models. I'm going to my notes so I don't miss any of them. So it'll include storm surge, tsunami, coastal erosion. Sorry, she was so quiet until I started talking. Coastal erosion, inland flooding, pluvial, which is just heavy rain, and then riverine flooding, and then also a Great Lakes model. So that'll be different than what we see out here. And so taking all those different types of flooding into consideration is a big change. Along with that, probably the biggest change is that we're going to be basing our rates on the distance from the water source, which we've never done before. And we're using a lot of different data from several different sources. And then if you look from the left to the right, you're going to see those rating variables. And we have a lot more now in this new methodology. So the type of building and the replacement cost value is new. So there's going to be a little bit more pricing equity based on that. So in the past, the lower cost homes were actually kind of subsidizing the higher cost homes because of the way our rating structure was set up. And now we take into consideration that $1 million home takes a lot more to rebuild than a $150,000 home. So the pricing is going to be more equitable. So I think that's going to be good to, or much better for our lower priced homes. So that equity is coming into play finally. And that's been something that a lot of people have asked for in the last few years. And then it'll also take into consideration the construction type. And then again, that big variable is that distance from the water source, whether that's a river, a stream, a coast, et cetera. And then the other things are prior claims, prior flood claims, et cetera. And then I mentioned the diverse range of flood peril. We're also going to take into consideration levees, and then also that broader range of flood frequency. So how often does it actually happen in this area? And then of course, which is the same as on our old legacy system, our fees and surcharges. So those are some of the basic changes that we're going to be having coming along they're going to make a difference in our lives. And I think in a lot of cases, it may lower rates. So it's going to be pretty interesting. I think one of the things that I would like to say to those 85 policyholders who are going into the high-risk flood zone for the first time, the big benefit for them may be to purchase now on the legacy system, because we're going to have like a glide path to our rates. So they'll start off at a lower rate if they're already a policyholder, and then those rates will go up at 18% a year until they're at their full actuarial rate. And that glide path is a pretty good deal. So if you know you're going into the high risk flood zone, I would encourage you to get a policy in advance. And let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about what some of the things, the changes are that are coming. Well, one of the cool things is there will be discounts that'll still be available for the pre-firm. That's a home that's built before the flood maps were created in your community, and thus there weren't any flood risk ordinances in place for building new structures. And so we've been giving them discounts for a very long time in the program, and those discounts will continue. And then we're also still going to have that glide path for newly mapped properties. So when you start off in our, with a policy in the first year after a map goes into effect, you start at a pretty low rate. And then if this is your primary home, that rate increases 18% annually. The two big changes that I think we'll probably get quite a few calls on are the fact that options to grandfather a policy into like an old flood zone are not going to be available any longer. But those discounts are still going to be pretty significant. And then also preferred risk policies will be eliminated. So even if you're in a low to moderate risk flood zone with no requirement to buy flood insurance due to mandatory purchase, you're still going to be rated based on your distance from the water source. And then I already talked a little bit about that replacement cost value to compensate for rating inequities, and that's going to be a big deal. Again, those lower cost homes are going to see a lot more rating equity than they've seen in the past. So I think that'll be a big deal for a lot of our homeowners, especially in the more rural areas where home prices don't tend to be as high, although I don't think that's always true here in Colorado. In some of our other states, I think that's true. And then as always, you can still transfer any of the discounts that you're getting through the NFIP to somebody you're selling your property to. So it's always better to transfer an existing policy to your new homeowner if you can when you sell your property. And then they'll continue on any glide path that you've established for your policy. So those are some of the basics of the program. I think the big thing to just remind people, if it's not a primary residence, that annual increase goes up to 25% a year. So anything other than a primary home will see a 25% rate increase as opposed to an 18% rate increase. And so, it'll be interesting in the next year. And one of the other changes that will be coming along is that Diana and I, my FEMA counterpart, won't be able to see the rates in the software. So in the past, we've had a rating manual where we could manually look up the rates and compare them to how you're rated, and that's not going to be the case. So, but we can still speak to underwriting and find out what why your rates have changed if you've got questions. So our contact information is at the end, and feel free to reach out with any property specific questions you've got. I'm happy to answer any general questions on the call today. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to you guys.
All right, thank you, Erin.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so switching over to development implications for being in the different flood zones. The requirements are very community specific. So the community ordinance is going to specify what needs to happen development wise if you're building in different areas of the flood hazard zones. As I mentioned earlier, there's different requirements, particularly if you're in a floodway or a non-floodway area. So pay special attention to that designation and whether or not you're in a floodway zone. During this kind of intermediate period where both the preliminary information and the effective information is available, it's a little bit of a gray period. Often communities may adopt the best available information and are typically use basically what's the more restrictive of the two data sets in order to make development implications, but that can change on a case-by-case basis. So again, if you're looking to develop during this time and you have questions about what the development implications are for being in or out of one of the new preliminary zones, but not in the effective or any specific scenario, I would recommend reaching out to your floodplain administrator or a community official to kind of help get the best information for this kind of transition time moving from the preliminary to effective stages. I mentioned earlier that I'd revisit the appeal and comment period and provide some additional detail about this period. So a couple key things to hit on with the appeal period, appeal and comment period, and differences between those two things. So an appeal, which is basically application to revise the map, that the preliminary map can't be just any information. It can't be, just someone saying, I saw flooding happening here, so this line should be moved. The appeal has to be based on mathematical information, scientific information, and it's can be used as a way to fix an error that's determined from on the maps. Technically incorrect data, but again, you have to show that that information is wrong via some sort of science-based approach, basically, that shows where the modeling error was or where the mapping area error was. And you have to provide that technical or scientific data in support of your appeal of the map during that 90-day appeal period. And again, that 90 days is very fixed. So it's best, if it's possible, to get your appeal information, if you have it, in at the beginning of that 90-day appeal period, in case it gets reviewed and it's determined that additional information is needed. I'll note appeals are limited to areas with new or modified special flood hazard areas, so keep that in mind. And then it's best if you have an appeal to submit that through the community so that they're aware of what's going on, and then also they can help to kind of walk you through the process and review to make sure everything that's needed for an appropriate appeal is included there and used and available, so that again, you're operating within that 90-day appeal period window and not missing out on that. I mentioned that it's actually titled the appeal and comment period. So a comment is basically a little bit less detail heavy kind of change to the map. The most common example that we use for a comment that would come in on a preliminary map would be if you notice that the name of a road needs to change based on some updated information, something like that. So comments can be submitted without the kind of technical or scientific data backing it. That can just be based on something that you see on the map that needs to be changed, that isn't necessarily tied to the data development that went into generating the flood zones. As I mentioned, it's best to submit appeals in coordination with your community. There is an online process that's available, and the website is shown up here on this slide to facilitate those appeals. And then you can also see that I have Terry Faye's contact information with CWCB there, which would be necessary for the appeal submittal. So if you're, again, point to take home, if you're working through an appeal, developing an appeal, best to coordinate with your community to make sure that everything gets submitted appropriately and that all the information is there. The same kind of goes for LOMARs and LOMAs. I'll go quickly through this. If there's a letter of map revision happening, so a change to the effective information during this gray period between preliminary and effective, it can vary as to the best approach, but most commonly you'll want to tie that that letter of map revision into both the preliminary and effective data, so you're included with both. If you're only tying into the preliminary information, that needs to be approved by FEMA, and you should note that that information wouldn't go effective until after the this updated flood risk information goes effective. So it essentially would be in wait until it goes effective. In terms of LOMA's letter of map amendments, those could be revalidated with a SOMA and submit new after effective. So if you have an existing LOMA and have questions about how that is impacted by this new mapping, again, best to reach out and submit that question to get some additional information for your specific case.
Let me add some detail to what a letter of map amendment is. So if you look at this mapping and you know your structure is elevated above the surrounding ground, a LOMA is basically sending survey information to FEMA showing that, and they can give you a letter saying, well, even though you've got this wide floodplain, the actual structure itself is above the surrounding grade by a certain amount. And they'll give you a letter saying that. So that's something also, though, to get more information on, through the local floodplain administrator, or others can help you with that as well.
Yep. Thanks, Rigel. So in terms of resources, the last slide in this presentation has a number of different individuals listed who may be specially suited to answer specific questions that you might have. The floodsmart.gov website has good information that you can look through. Colorado Water Conservation Board's flood page with the link shown here on the screen has some flood information resources that may be of help to addressing some questions you may have. And then the coloradohazardmapping.com website, I'm going to walk through a couple of features of it here on these slides. It is also a great resource. It's specifically set up to kind of house risk map or flood risk information for stuff going on in Colorado. So it has a lot of information that may be of use. You can see the website both on this slide and at the bottom of all the slides if you're looking to access that. Within the this Colorado Hazard Mapping website, again, there's a lot of information. The one that's likely going to have maybe be the best starting point is the flood hazard information tab, which has flood risk information for homeowners, general information, and county specific information. Within that flood hazard tool, there's one of the most commonly used one is our homeowner information tool, and essentially what that allows you to do is go in and you can enter in your physical address, and it will generate a report for you that shows where you stack up against the effective information versus the new information. It will provide some basic information about your flood zone, some general information about what it means to be in the flood zone it shows you in if you are located there. So that's a great spot to start if you're looking for more information for your specific property. The general information section on the website has a lot of tutorials and fact sheets that will provide good background on a lot of the stuff covered here tonight, and may address some common frequently asked questions. And then there's detailed information specific to this county's flood risk study that it's available on the county flood information tab. So if you go into Larimer County, in this case, you can scroll through a bunch of different information and find a lot of great resources that are available there. So to conclude here, to leave a little bit of time for questions, I just want to kind of reiterate some of the points we've hit on through the slides here. The information that we have modeled and are showing on these preliminary maps is risk that is already there. We're going through this regulatory process to make them effective maps that can be used for development purposes, et cetera. But that risk is already there. So like Aaron said, if you're in a position where you may be debating whether or not to get flood insurance, it's good idea to understand that risk is already there, understand what you can do to be proactive about getting flood insurance, or getting more information about what the implications are about being in the zone you're at or going to be in. So just know that flood risk that we're studying is already there and is already a risk to you. The data that we're developing, again, right now is in the preliminary stage, but ultimately we'll be going onto flood insurance rate maps. So it will be kind of the letter of the law once it gets to that point. But the information is not effective or not used for those determinations until it goes effective. So until it goes to that final stage. So up until that point, the effective information that's on the maps that currently are out there is going to be what ultimately dictates those questions. And then can't iterate it enough, but if you have any questions, we've covered a lot of information here. If you have questions about anything that we've gone through, any specific questions about your property, please reach out to any one of the contacts that are listed on this last slide, any one of the presenters here, in order to get more information to kind of help walk you through your specific case if you have questions about what's going on with this new information. So with that, I will turn it back to Nathan and Marta, and I guess open it up for questions if there are any.
Yeah, I guess.
I do have a question. Go ahead, Marta, you're first.
No. I was just going to say, if anybody has questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Okay, my name's Christy Launard. I live over in the Meadows on the east side of I-25. We bought this property under the assumption that we were not in a floodplain, because where we lived before, we were in a floodplain. At that time, FEMA insurance for our property, which was a higher risk location, and I understand that, but it was going to be $5,000 a year increased insurance cost. So this is very upsetting to me that we're all of a sudden being designated into a floodplain when we're along the what creek is it? Box Elder Creek. So I'm going to make sure I talk to our surveyors who will also have data, and I'll try and talk to some of these people that are, their websites are listed, their web addresses. When will you know the initial date for the 90-day appeal? Because if it's going to be a hard 90 days, we need to know that start date as soon as possible, please.
So this is Rigel. The 90-day appeal date will be published in the newspaper. It'll likely be, and I can't give you an exact date because it has to get approved A in the Federal Register and B by FEMA. So we have to get those approvals, but it will be approved in the local newspapers. It's published in the legal section, but we usually also alert the local communities so that it can be added to their web pages as well. And that's something we need to talk with Wellington about, but that's the notice. And I would say best case scenario, or maybe worst case scenario, depending on how you look at it, it could probably happen as soon as a month from now. But sometimes it takes another month or two before it actually publishes in the paper.
Okay, because We don't take the physical newspaper, Colorado, and we look at it, we subscribe online. Then you said it'll be in the legal section of the newspaper?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so we know to keep an eye on that. All right.
But why aren't you gonna send out stuff to people if they don't take the newspaper?
Because we know some people who don't take the paper.
Yeah, so usually the local community floodplain administrator will also publicize on the website or, send subsequent mailers or anything like that to let everybody know when the appeal period is close to starting. And actually, I think we were talking the other day with the county and we're thinking maybe it might be late July, right, Joel? Maybe on the 23rd or so of July. So it probably will be over a month.
Okay. Believe it or not, I actually have some friends here in the Meadows who don't own a computer. So it's going to have to be broadcast somehow that they will also be alerted. Now, I'm on the HOA board and I will make sure our neighborhood knows, but you need to be aware that there are some people who refuse to join the computer age.
And there's gonna be a lot of people who can afford another $5,000 a year insurance. I mean, you're talking, if we get, suppose we get $5,000 a year and then you get an 18% increase from now until you die, who's gonna be able to afford that?
So there won't be an 18% increase until you die, and most people do not see a premium of $5,000 a year. I would say the average premium that we see is anywhere from $1,200 to $2,500 a year, which is still
That's
significant.
still significant.
Yeah, and I will say, I didn't bring it up in my slides, but there are times when private insurance makes more sense than us, and sometimes they're cheaper than us. And I do see private.
We tried when I was up the Pooter. So, okay, high risk. I got that. Our insurance agent at that time, who was State Farm, was able to provide reduced rate flood insurance. But then FEMA stepped in and said, no more. You don't get it through the companies. You get it through FEMA or you don't get it. Has that already changed again? Because at that time.
Well, how long ago was that?
10 years ago, I'd say.
Yeah, I would say it's changed.
Because I don't trust.
Give me a call tomorrow. I've got a lot of options I can send you to, and I'd be happy to look at your rates, because $5,000 doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you're way below the base flood elevation. And like I said on our presentation earlier tonight, a lot of people with today's rates on this legacy rating methodology are going to see a premium cut. So the rates are actually going to go down, and in some cases pretty dramatically. If you look at that state link that was provided on the first slide where it talks about our state statistics, Colorado's going to see a pretty dramatic improvement in our premium. So I think a lot of people will see a benefit from this risk rating 2.0. I think the people that are going to see a premium increase are actually going to be our folks that are in that low to moderate risk flood zone, especially if they're close to a flooding source. Because now it's going to be based on distance from the water. So if they're still pretty close to the water, even though they're not in a high risk flood zone, the rates are probably going to go up. But people in a high risk flood zone should be either lower or about the same. And then a very small percentage of our policies, I think, if I'm not mistaken, like 3% in Colorado are going to see a more than $20 premium increase. So your $5,000 seems really out of whack to me. So if you want to give me a call tomorrow, I'd be happy to look at it and figure that out for you.
We're not carrying it. I wasn't going to pay that.
Well, if you don't have a mortgage, you're not required to. The problem is.
No, but we have a mortgage. But that's when we went to our State Farm guy, and he was able to provide us with a discounted flood insurance until FEMA pulled that access. So.
Well, FEMA's never pulled back access. You're always available to buy flood insurance through us, always.
Oh, through FEMA, yeah, but through they can't. They told State Farm they could no longer provide flood insurance to their policy.
No, your agent chose not to write flood insurance anymore. State Farm agents can still write through FEMA. So your agent just didn't want to deal with it. Unfortunately, is probably the case. I mean, maybe not. Maybe he was told something incorrect, but State Farm agents still write flood insurance.
Okay,
FEMA.
I have a quick question. I've been trying to write stuff down, and I can't write fast enough to write all the addresses down here. This is being recorded. Will it be easy for me to access it, and I can go back over it at my leisure and write down the various names and URLs?
Yeah, it's being recorded, and then the plan is to post it to the town's website. It's going to be similar to if you've ever watched the YouTube video of the board meetings. It'll be a link to like the YouTube channel for the town.
Well, that's good, because we do like YouTube, so that's good to know. Thank you.
Yep.
How soon from tonight would the YouTube video be available? I know.
As you know, as soon as I can get the recording and we can get it uploaded. It's just going to take a little bit. Yeah, maybe a day or 2 or 3.
Okay, all right. Just so I know, because we definitely want to keep our fingers on this one. I know there's the little Box Elder Dam that everybody's afraid might break, and that's what'll cause flooding through our neighborhood, right?
Mm-hmm. And I did send out direct mailers, paper letters to the affected properties. Hopefully you got one of those.
We did.
It's right here.
Okay.
If you see me, it's right here.
Okay.
That's how we knew about this. So, okay. So I'll do some research. Who did you use for surveying?
And be sure to give me a holler tomorrow, because your rate, that 5,000 a year doesn't make a lot of sense to
What is
me.
your?
I'd love to take a look at
Yeah,
it.
give me contact information for you, please.
That's Aaron.
Yeah, I got it.
It's, you can call me at my office line. That's 303-674-1449. Or my cell is 571-422-7630.
Thank you, Aaron.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Okay, I
have
think
a
I'm done with
question.
my questions. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jim France. I just moved into Hartford Homes on the west side of the interstate. So the risk is that there is a reservoir at the top of Box Elder Creek. Is that right? When was the last time there was a flood in Box Elder Creek?
Hi, this is Bob Gowling. I can probably answer that question for you. There are what's called the B dams. There's one on Box Elder Creek and one on Coal Creek, just above the town of Wellington. And those are flood control structures that were built back in the 80s and 70s and 80s. So I think that's what you're referring to.
So is that an Army Corps of Engineering problem if those dams are subject to breaking down or what?
Well, they were actually built by the Soil Conservation Service, which has since morphed into the National Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. We've been working with them for the past couple of years on upgrading those dams to the point where they are safe in accordance with the applicable state requirements.
Okay, so
So-
when was the
and
last time there was a flood?
And I'll add that this analysis isn't assuming a breach of those dams. It's calculating the 1% annual chance that Isaac mentioned earlier. So it's looking at if the dams were designed for that flood, then there's obviously some attenuation that's taken into account.
Yeah.
If they are not designed for that flood, then it would release the flow as it would as they're designed, is what's typically taken into account in the hydrologic study. Now I'm speaking in generalities here because our group did not do the hydrology study. We picked it up after that. So I'd have to go back and review the study to see what else went into that.
I can say as just a point of general information that the B dams are outrageously effective flood control structures. The 100-year flow rate coming into the B dam, that's again just north of town on Box Elder, is way higher than the 100-year flow rate coming out, and that 100-year flow rate as mitigated by the B dam is the one that's assumed, the one that's used in this floodplain study.
Okay, so Aaron mentioned that primary residents would be up to 18% till it reaches the actuary numbers, and that if you're renting, it would be 25%. So one of my questions is, why are owners being penalized in that situation? And my last is just looking at this because I'm playing devil's advocate. Who in a business 101 sense would financially gain from this updated modeling system, whether that be a government agency, a non-government agency, and or commercial?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer the last question. I'm not sure you're going with that, but in terms of the premium increases, it isn't just renters. It's like a commercial building that gets a 25% increase a year, and any non-primary residence. So that's vacation homes, any homes that are lived in less than 50% of the time.
And why is that?
And then all other structures. You know, I don't know that I can answer that super well, other than to say that it was a legislative change. I think that there was a lot of complaint from people feeling like they were paying higher premiums so that other people could have flood insurance on their vacation homes. So I think that's why that increase is higher for non-primary structures, is to account for people's angst about feeling like they're subsidizing other people's vacation homes. And that's why we've got this equity built into the rates now as well, so that the homes that cost less to replace after a disaster are paying a lower premium than the homes that cost more to replace. So a home with a higher cost value is going to have a higher premium attached to it. So,
Sorry, Aaron. I was going to say, I'll try to answer the second question.
Great.
You know, this program wasn't set up for financial gain. This program was set up because people flood, cost money, right? This is an insurance program. Now, it's really kind of like, I look at it like car insurance. If you are in an accident, your insurance goes up. This is kind of looking at it the same way, where if you are at a higher risk of flood, you pay a higher rate, is what the intent of all this is. And that's why there's
pooling. I understand the pooling principle. If there's never a claim here at Box Elder, then we are all paying for everybody else in the FEMA pool across the United States. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's messed up.
It's all based on the 1% annual chance of flood risk.
And I would say that's true for any insurance you have, sir. So, I mean, how many of us own a homeowner's policy or health insurance policy or an auto insurance policy that we don't necessarily collect on in a given year? So, I mean, that's sort of the basis of insurance, right? Is that they generate a pool of cash for those moments when we do have the large claim. And that's the whole point of insurance. So, and I would say what we're seeing, and I didn't talk about it in the basics of the slide, but you know, we're seeing an increase, not just in claims for people who are in high-risk flood zones, but for people who are in low-risk flood zones. When I started in this program 12 years ago, we used to say 20% of our annual claims were for people who were in a low to moderate risk flood zone. That number today is more like 35%. That's just in 12 years. So we're seeing a pretty dramatic increase.
This is high risk now, Box Elder? Is going to be high risk?
So Box Elder has always been a high-risk floodplain. The limits are changing based on this analysis, but it's not a new designation.
Okay.
So how come when we bought our home 6 years ago, that there was nothing out there that we were in a floodplain? We never knew anything about that until just now.
So again, the limits are changing based on this updated analysis, but Box Elder itself has been a designated floodplain.
Are we able to subsidize the insurance on our tax forms, federal tax forms?
No.
No, not that I know of.
Huh.
I was never able to.
Interesting.
What we're getting stuck with is the nation has been hit with so many natural disasters from shore to shore and border to border that FEMA's just been slammed in the last, 20 years at least.
And here in Colorado too, don't think it doesn't happen here.
Right.
2013 was a whopper.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was a whopper. And our claims in low to moderate risk flood zone were between 35 and 40%.
Oh, yeah.
Not just A zones, not just people who were told they were in a high risk flood zone. And so a lot of those people were not insured. And guess what? Your communities do not bounce back as quickly if you don't have a pretty strong policy count, for both low risk and high risk. You get a lot more urban blight. You have a lot more problems with people being able to come back. They lose their homes, they get foreclosed on. So having that flood insurance, it's a big safety net.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, Cindy. Hi, this is Shelley. I just had a couple questions. If you know when those new rates are going to, or do you know what the new rates are going to be yet on the new modeling system?
No, we don't.
Okay.
They come out October 1. And I forgot to mention this. I meant to bring it up on the first slide that I had, but October 1, anybody writing a new flood policy will immediately go into the new rates. Anybody with an existing policy, they wait until your next renewal date. So, if you renewed in April of this year, your new rates would come into effect in April of next year, because our policy is an annual policy. So
Okay.
now if for some reason we suspected that the new rates would benefit you, you could call your agent and have them run the new rates, and they could reduce your premium. So
Okay.
yeah, but we're not going to be able to see the rates. They're not going to give us the rating engine for at least another year. We can talk to underwriting though and make those determinations if you want to
But
take a
you
look
can
at it.
still look at the maps and tell where they're going to be required if you have a federally backed mortgage.
Right. No, I can tell, like, I live off Horse Chestnut, sorry. And I did actually already go ahead and look at the map that, you were telling where to look at. And I realized, like, when I bought my home, I don't know if you call it the culvert or whatever that runs behind the houses, that floodplain was just that little section. And now I think it runs from the railroad tracks up to 3rd. But my just question was it just the new buildings that we did here? Because I noticed, like, the Knowles, just to south of us across the street, their floodplain did not increase, but ours did dramatically. And then the other question is there going to be any way to do any type of mitigation to that? I don't know if it's a culvert or stream or whatever. So I just had those 2 questions too.
So I'll speak to what causes a floodplain to increase. All right, so there's a couple things. One is this is based on new updated terrain based on what the old study used to have. I'd have to look at the date of the old effective study, but usually that new information provides a better view of what the Earth's surface is doing. 2, again, the hydrology was updated, as Isaac mentioned, based on more recent data that's available, showing what the size of a 1% annual chance flood would be. If there's a project for, like, say, updating a culvert or something like that, that's more of a mitigation project. And those type of projects obviously happen in communities. That would be something to talk to Wellington about, if there's any plans for that, or what the potential change would be by doing something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, if there aren't any further questions, I'll throw it out there again. For the town, my contact information is there. If you want to set up some sort of a meeting with myself, virtually or in person, feel free to reach out, phone or email. We will have the recording posted on the town's website sometime this week. I don't know when, but as soon as we can get it up there, we'll get it up there, and then we'll send out a notification, probably through social media again or something along those lines. And then we'll be looking to, it sounded like there was some interest to do some sort of paper mailers for the 90-day review period when that starts. And I've got all the addresses, so I can probably do that again as well, so that everyone has notification if they don't necessarily have a computer. I think that's all for me, Marta.
Nope, nothing on my end. I'll stop recording, or Terry, do you have anything else before I stop recording?
No, I don't. Thank you all for participating in the meeting tonight and asking the questions.